The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain that marked her as either victim or murderer, and Nora Winters knew the men in the saloon would assume the latter before she could speak a word in her own defense. She stumbled into Agua Caliente, Arizona on foot, her boots splitting at the seams, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat from 3 days of walking through the desert. It was late August 1882, and the sun had been merciless. Her lips were cracked, her throat so dry she could barely swallow, and when she pushed through the doors of the Silver Creek Saloon, every eye in the place turned toward her like she was an apparition risen from hell itself. The piano player stopped mid-note. Cards were lowered to tables. A woman in a scarlet dress ascending the stairs paused with one hand on the railing. Nora stood there swaying, trying to focus her vision, trying to remember how to form words with her swollen tongue. "Water," she managed to croak. "Please." Nobody moved. They just stared at the blood, at her torn sleeve, at the wild look in her green eyes that spoke of horrors witnessed and barely survived. She took one step forward and her knees buckled. The floor rushed up to meet her, and she braced for impact. But strong arms caught her before she fell. She flinched violently, her hands flying up to shield her face, a strangled cry escaping her throat. She had learned in the past 3 days that men's hands meant pain, meant danger, meant death. "Easy now," a voice said, low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Through her terror, she registered that the arms were lowering her gently, that the voice held no threat, only concern. Her hands were still raised defensively when she dared to open her eyes. The man who had caught her was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, dusty trousers, and a gun belt that marked him as either lawman or cowboy. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with several days' stubble. When he started to stand, presumably to get her that water she desperately needed, her hands jerked up again instinctively, her whole body tensing for a blow. She saw something flicker across his face, understanding mixed with something that looked like anger, though not directed at her. Without a word, he sat back down on the saloon floor, making himself lower than her, less threatening. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I'm just going to get you some water. I am not going to hurt you. My name is Wade Irvin. I work the cattle ranch north of here." She watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs as he turned his head toward the bar. "Samuel, bring a pitcher of water and a clean glass, and get Doc Morrison." His voice carried authority, despite its gentleness. "Wade, she's got blood all over her," someone said from near the bar. "Could be she killed someone." "Then we will sort it out after she has had water and the doc has looked at her," Wade said, still sitting on the floor beside Nora. "Any man here got a problem with basic human decency can take it up with me outside." Nobody voiced any further objections. The bartender, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, brought over a pitcher and glass. Wade took them with a nod of thanks, then poured water with steady hands. He offered the glass to Nora, but did not lean toward her, did not make any movement that might spook her. She reached for it with trembling fingers, nearly dropped it, and forced herself to drink slowly, though every fiber of her being screamed to gulp it down. The water was cool, almost sweet, the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She drank one glass, then another, then a third before her stomach protested. "Slowly," Wade cautioned. "You will make yourself sick." She nodded, lowering the glass. Now that the immediate desperation of thirst was fading, she became aware of the dozens of eyes still watching her, of the whispers starting to circulate. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them, trying to make herself small. Wade seemed to sense her discomfort. "Show is over, gentlemen," he announced, his voice firmer now. "Lady needs some privacy. Charlie, Pete, how about you boys finish that card game? Samuel, music would be nice." Gradually, reluctantly, The saloon returned to something approximating normal activity. The piano player started up again, a jaunty tune that seemed absurdly cheerful given the circumstances. Cards were shuffled and dealt. Conversations resumed, though Nora could feel the glances still sliding her way. "Can you tell me your name?" Wade asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Winters." "Miss Winters, can you tell me what happened to you?" She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head. Where would she even begin? How could she explain the nightmare of the past week, the carefully laid plans that had gone so horribly wrong? "Is that your blood?" he asked gently. "No." The word came out hoarse. It belonged to my sister." Something in her voice, or perhaps the past tense she used, made Wade's expression tighten. "I am sorry," he said, and she could hear that he meant it. Before she could respond, a thin man in a black suit pushed through the saloon doors, carrying a medical bag. He had spectacles perched on a beaked nose and the brisk manner of someone accustomed to emergencies. "Where's the patient?" "Wade, what in blazes are you doing sitting on the floor?" "Doc Morrison, this is Miss Nora Winters. She has had a rough time of it." Wade still made no move to stand. "Miss Winters, Doc Morrison is the best physician in Agua Caliente. Actually, he is the only physician in Agua Caliente, but he is still pretty good." Despite everything, Nora felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Doc Morrison knelt down beside her, his movements careful and professional. "May I examine you, Miss Winters? I need to see if you are injured." She nodded, though she tensed when he reached toward her. He worked efficiently, checking her pulse, looking at her eyes, examining the cuts and bruises on her arms. "These need cleaning," he said. "You are dehydrated and suffering from exposure, but nothing that rest and fluids will not fix. Can you tell me about the blood on your dress?" "It is not mine," she repeated. "Whose is it?" "My sister's. Sarah. We were traveling to California. We were going to start a new life." Her voice broke. "There were 4 men. They stopped our wagon 3 days ago, just after dawn. They said they wanted our supplies. Then they saw Sarah." She did not need to elaborate. The men in the saloon knew exactly what that meant. In 1882, in the wild territories of Arizona, a woman traveling without male protection was vulnerable in ways that made Nora's stomach turn even now. "Sarah fought them," Nora continued, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "She told me to run. I did not want to leave her, but she screamed at me to go, so I ran. I hid in the rocks, and I heard... She could not finish. The sound still echoed in her nightmares. Wade's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "Where is your sister now, Miss Winters?" "Dead. They killed her when she would not stop fighting." Then they set fire to the wagon and rode off laughing. I waited until I was sure they were gone, and then I went back. I tried to pull her away from the fire, but it was too hot, too fast. I got blood on me from where they had. She swallowed hard. I buried her as best I could. Then I started walking. I did not know where I was going. I just walked." The saloon had gone quiet again. Even the piano had stopped. Doc Morrison's face was grave. "Did you see which direction the men went?" "South, I think. I was not paying attention. I was just trying to survive." Wade finally stood, but he did it slowly, telegraphing his movements. Nora noticed that he kept his distance, respecting the fear that still thrummed through her veins. "Doc, can you take Miss Winters somewhere safe? The boarding house?" "Martha Colby's place would be best," Doc Morrison agreed. "Martha has a good heart and a sturdy lock on her doors." "I do not have any money," Nora said quickly. "Everything burned with the wagon. Our savings, our belongings, everything." "Do not worry about that right now," Wade said. "Agua Caliente takes care of its own, and as of this moment, you are one of us." Nora looked at him, this cowboy who had sat down on a dirty saloon floor so she would not fear him, who had spoken gently when he could have demanded answers, who looked at her with respect rather than suspicion despite the blood on her dress. Something in her chest, something that had felt broken and dead since she watched her sister die, stirred weakly back to life. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. Wade's winter blue eyes met hers steadily. "Because you need kindness, Miss Winters, and because anyone who survives what you have survived deserves a safe place to rest." Doc Morrison helped her to her feet, and this time she did not flinch away. Her legs were shaky, but she managed to stay upright. Wade walked ahead of them to the door, and she noticed the way he scanned the street before gesturing that it was safe. Even in her exhausted state, she appreciated the caution. The boarding house was only 2 buildings down, a whitewashed 2-story structure with green shutters and a neat little flower garden that somehow survived the Arizona heat. A plump woman in her 50s answered Doc Morrison's knock, took one look at Nora, and immediately ushered her inside with a stream of sympathetic clucking. Martha Colby was everything her house suggested: warm, practical, and unflappable. Within 10 minutes, Nora found herself in a small but clean room on the second floor, with Martha bringing up hot water for washing and a nightgown that smelled of lavender. "You take your time, dear," Martha said. "Get yourself cleaned up, and I will bring you some soup. You look like you have not eaten in days." "I have not," Nora admitted. When she was alone, she stripped off the ruined dress, the blood-stained chemise, the torn stockings. She scrubbed at her skin with the hot water and soap Martha had provided, scrubbed until she was pink and raw, but she could not wash away the memories. When she finally pulled on the clean nightgown, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror over the washstand. She barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back at her. She was 22 years old, and she felt ancient. Martha brought soup and bread, sat with her while she ate, and asked no prying questions. When Nora had eaten as much as she could manage, Martha helped her into the narrow bed. "You rest now," she said, pulling the curtains closed against the afternoon sun. "You are safe here. I have a shotgun downstairs, and I know how to use it." Nora wanted to thank her, wanted to explain that it was not the house she feared, but the nightmares waiting behind her closed eyelids. But exhaustion won out over fear, and she sank into sleep like a stone dropping into deep water. She woke screaming sometime after dark. Strong hands were holding her down, and she could smell smoke, could hear Sarah screaming her name. She fought wildly, blindly, until a woman's voice cut through the panic. "Nora! Nora, you are safe. You are at Martha's boarding house. You are safe." Reality reasserted itself slowly. The hands belonged to Martha, who had rushed in when she heard the screams. The smoke was just the lamp Martha had lit. Sarah was dead, buried in a shallow grave somewhere in the desert between here and where their dreams had died. Nora collapsed back against the pillows, shaking. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I am so sorry." "No need for apologies, dear. I would be more worried if you were not having nightmares after what you have been through." Martha smoothed Nora's sweat-damp hair back from her forehead. "Would you like some tea? I find it helps when sleep turns against us." They sat together in the small room, drinking tea in the lamplight, while Martha talked about inconsequential things. The weather, her garden, the new shipment of goods expected at the general store. It was exactly what Nora needed, this gentle return to normalcy, this reminder that the world still contained mundane concerns and small kindnesses. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Sheriff Tom Garrett arrived at the boarding house just after breakfast, his deputy in tow, asking questions about the attack. Nora forced herself to describe everything she could remember: the men's horses, their general appearance, the direction they had ridden. It was not much, but the sheriff took careful notes. "We will send word to the surrounding territories," he said. 4 men traveling together, willing to commit murder. They will likely strike again. If we are lucky, someone will spot them." "And if you are not lucky?" Nora asked quietly. Sheriff Garrett's expression was grim. Then we hope they are stupid enough to come to Agua Caliente, where folks know to watch out for each other. After the sheriff left, Nora faced a new problem. She had no clothes except the ruined dress, no money, no possessions at all. Martha assured her that the women of Agua Caliente would help, and sure enough, by midday, several ladies arrived with donations. Dresses, petticoats, stockings, even a pair of sturdy boots that fit reasonably well. They were kind but curious, their eyes full of sympathy and questions they were too polite to ask directly. One woman, younger than the others, lingered after the rest had left. She had honey-colored hair and a determined set to her jaw. "Miss Winters, my name is Caroline Henderson. My husband owns the mercantile. We are looking for someone to help in the store if you are interested in work." Nora blinked in surprise. "You would hire me? You do not even know me. I know you survived something terrible. I know you walked 3 days through the desert and lived to tell about it. That tells me you are stronger than you look." Besides, Caroline added with a small smile, "Martha vouches for you, and that is worth more than any reference letter." "I have worked in a store before," Nora said slowly. "Back in Kansas before Sarah and I left." "Then you are hired if you want the position. We can start you tomorrow if you are feeling up to it. The work is not hard, just selling goods and keeping inventory. My husband handles the heavy lifting and the accounts." It felt surreal, this offer of employment, this suggestion that life could simply continue despite everything that had happened. But Nora found herself nodding. "Yes, thank you. I would like that very much." That afternoon, feeling restless despite her lingering exhaustion, Nora ventured out of the boarding house for the first time since her arrival. Agua Caliente was a small town, perhaps 300 residents, built around a natural spring that gave the place its name. The main street boasted a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, a church, the boarding house, and a handful of other establishments. Beyond the town proper, she could see ranch land stretching toward distant mountains, and the cattle that meant prosperity for many of the residents. She was standing on the boarding house porch, trying to orient herself to this place that was now her home by default rather than choice, when a familiar figure rode up on a handsome bay horse. Wade Irvin dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on foot, tied his horse to the hitching post, and climbed the porch steps. "Miss Winters," he greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. "It is good to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, and was surprised to realize it was partially true. Her body was recovering at least. Her mind and heart would take longer. "Thank you for your help yesterday." "I did not properly thank you." "No thanks needed. Any decent person would have done the same." "I am not sure that is true," Nora said quietly, "but I appreciate it nonetheless." Wade shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Miss Winters, I know this might seem forward, but I wanted to ask if you would feel more comfortable if I kept my distance. I mean to say, Agua Caliente is a small town, and we will likely encounter each other regularly. If my presence causes you distress, I can make myself scarce when you are around. I do not want to remind you of those men or cause you any fear." Nora stared at him, astonished. It had not occurred to her that he might be worried about frightening her, that he had given thought to her comfort and peace of mind. "Mr. Irvin, you sat down on a saloon floor so I would not be afraid. I do not think you could possibly understand how much that meant. You do not remind me of those men at all. You remind me that there are still good people in the world." Something in his expression softened. "I am glad to hear that. And please, call me Wade. Mr. Irvin makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and going to church meetings." "Then you should call me Nora." "Nora it is." He smiled, and she noticed that it transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. I actually came by to let you know that some of the ranch hands and I are planning to ride out tomorrow to see if we can find where your wagon was attacked. If we can locate your sister's grave, we could arrange for a proper burial in the town cemetery. I thought you might want to be there. If we do, Nora's throat tightened. She had left Sarah in an unmarked grave, covered with rocks and sand, with no marker or ceremony. The thought of bringing her sister home, of giving her a proper resting place, was almost too much. Yes, she whispered, I would want that. But I do not know if I could find the place again. I was not paying attention to landmarks. You remember the general direction you walked from? She nodded. Then that is a start. We will find it, Nora. I promise you that. He kept his promise. 2 days later, Wade and 3 other ranch hands found the burned remains of the wagon and the pile of rocks marking Sarah's grave. They brought Sarah's body back to Agua Caliente, wrapped in a clean blanket, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. Reverend Michaels, who ran the little church on the edge of town, spoke about loss and hope and the promise of heaven. The women sang hymns. The men removed their hats and stood with heads bowed. And Nora stood by the grave that would hold all that remained of her older sister, the person who had raised her after their parents died, who had saved the money for their trip west, who had sacrificed everything so Nora might live. She could not cry. The tears were locked somewhere too deep to reach. She just stood there, numb and hollow, while they lowered the coffin into the ground. Afterward, back at the boarding house, Martha brought her tea and sat with her in silence. Sometimes, Nora was learning, silence was the greatest kindness of all. The next day, she started work at Henderson's Mercantile. Caroline was patient and kind, teaching her where things were kept, how to measure out flour and sugar, how to cut fabric from the bolts with minimal waste. The work was simple, but demanding enough to keep her mind occupied. Customers came and went, ranchers buying supplies, wives shopping for their families, children with pennies to spend on peppermint sticks. One of those customers, she quickly learned, was Wade. He seemed to need supplies with remarkable frequency, stopping by every few days to buy tobacco or coffee or some other small item. He was always polite, always respectful, never lingering too long or making her uncomfortable. But she began to notice the way his eyes sought her out when he entered the store, the way he smiled when she greeted him, the way he found small reasons to make conversation. You are settling in well, he observed one afternoon in mid-September, as she wrapped his purchase of coffee and sugar. Caroline says you are a natural at storekeeping. It is easier than herding cattle, I imagine. Different challenges, he said diplomatically. Though I will say, cattle rarely complain about the prices. She smiled despite herself and saw his expression warm in response. It was becoming easier to smile around Wade, she realized. Easier to relax, to feel something approaching normal. Nora, he said, his voice turning more serious, I know it has only been a few weeks, but I was wondering if you might consider taking a walk with me sometime. Nothing improper, just a walk around town, maybe down to the spring. I would like to get to know you better, if you are willing. Her first instinct was to refuse. The last thing she needed was romantic entanglement, especially with someone as kind as Wade. She could not bear the thought of letting him get close, only to discover all the broken pieces inside her. But then she looked at his face, at the hope and uncertainty there, at the respect in his eyes that said he would accept whatever answer she gave, without complaint or pressure. And she thought about Sarah, who had told her just days before the attack that she deserved happiness, that she should not be afraid to take chances on good things. I would like that, she heard herself say. His smile could have lit up the whole store. How about Sunday afternoon after church? Sunday afternoon sounds perfect. Sunday arrived with clear skies and temperatures finally dropping below unbearable. Nora wore one of the donated dresses, a pale yellow cotton with tiny flowers embroidered on the collar, and pinned her dark hair up carefully. Martha made approving noises and shooed her out the door when Wade arrived to collect her. They walked slowly through the town, Wade keeping a respectful distance between them, pointing out buildings and landmarks. He showed her the schoolhouse where his younger sister had studied before she married and moved to Tucson. He pointed out the best place to watch the sunset, a small rise just beyond the church. He talked about his work at the ranch, the challenges of keeping cattle healthy in the desert climate, the satisfaction of working land he hoped to own himself someday. "You do not own the ranch?" Nora asked. "Not yet. I am the foreman, which means I manage the day-to-day operations, but the ranch belongs to Thomas Irving. He is getting on in years, no children of his own. He has told me he is willing to sell me half the operation when I have saved enough money. Another 2 years, maybe 3, and I should have what I need. That is an ambitious goal. I believe in working towards something," Wade said. "My father was a drifter, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. I watched my mother struggle with that uncertainty, never knowing where we would be from one month to the next. I decided early on that I wanted different. I wanted land, stability, something permanent." "And family?" Nora asked, then wished she had not. It was too personal, too much like fishing for his intentions. But Wade did not seem to mind. "Yes," he said simply. "Family is part of that dream. A wife, children, a home that belongs to us. The whole picture." They had reached the spring, a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. Wade gestured to a flat rock that served as a bench, and they sat down. For a few minutes, they simply watched the water, listened to the birds in the trees, enjoyed the peace. "Can I ask you something?" Wade said eventually. "You can ask, I might not answer." "That is fair." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What were you and Sarah hoping to find in California?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Opportunity, I suppose. Sarah had heard there were teaching positions available, and she had her certificate. I was hoping to find work, save money, maybe eventually open a dress shop. Our parents died when I was 12. Sarah was 18. She gave up her chance to marry so she could raise me. I wanted us to have a fresh start, somewhere she could finally think about her own happiness instead of just surviving. She sounds like she was a good person." "She was the best person I have ever known." Nora's voice cracked slightly. "She died protecting me, Wade. Those men, they could have taken everything and left us alive. But they wanted more, and Sarah fought them to give me a chance to escape. I ran while my sister was being murdered. What does that make me?" "Alive," Wade said firmly. "It makes you alive, which is what she wanted. You did not choose to run because you were a coward, Nora. You ran because she was wise enough to know that 2 deaths would be worse than 1. She saved you. Honor that by living the best life you can." Tears finally came, the first real tears since the attack. Wade did not try to touch her or comfort her physically. He simply sat beside her, a solid presence, and let her cry. When the tears finally subsided, he offered her a clean handkerchief. "I am sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "Never apologize for grief. It has to go somewhere." They sat a while longer, until the angle of the sun suggested it was time to head back. As they walked, Nora felt something shift inside her. The pain was still there, the guilt and loss and anger. But alongside it now was something else, something fragile but growing. The possibility that healing might be possible, that life might still hold good things. Over the following weeks, Sunday walks became a regular occurrence. Wade was patient, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to simply spend time in her company. They talked about everything and nothing. His work, her days at the mercantile, books they had read, places they had been. Gradually, Nora began to share more about her past, her childhood in Kansas, her memories of Sarah, her fears about the future. One evening in early October, as the air finally held a hint of autumn coolness, Wade invited her to a town dance being held in the church hall. Nora hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of being in a crowded space, but Wade promised they could leave at any time if she felt overwhelmed. The hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. A trio of musicians played fiddle, guitar, and harmonica. Couples whirled around the floor, while others stood in clusters along the walls, gossiping and laughing. Nora felt her chest tighten with anxiety, but Wade's steady presence beside her helped. "We do not have to dance if you do not want to," he said quietly. "We can just stand here and make fun of everyone else's dancing." She laughed, surprised by the sound. "That seems unkind. Not if we keep it between ourselves." They watched for a while, and Wade provided running commentary that made Nora's sides ache from suppressed giggles. When a slower song started, he turned to her with an inquiring look. "May I have this dance? I promise to keep my distance and avoid stepping on your feet." She took a breath and nodded. His hand was warm when it closed around hers, his other hand settling respectfully at her waist. He kept his promise about distance, maintaining a proper space between them as they moved around the floor. Nora found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the simple pleasure of music and movement. "You are a good dancer," she observed. "My mother insisted I learn. She said no son of hers would grow up to be a graceless oaf. Remind me to thank her someday. She died 4 years ago, but I like to think she's watching and taking satisfaction in the lessons sticking. I am sorry. I did not know. It is all right. The grief is old now, more like an ache than a wound." He twirled her gently. "Tell me, Nora Winters, are you glad you stayed in Agua Caliente? Or do you still wish you had made it to California?" She considered the question seriously. "I think I am where I am supposed to be," she said slowly. "I did not choose it, and I would give anything to have my sister back. But the people here have been kind. The town feels safe, and there are aspects of my life here that I value very much." "Such as," he prompted, his winter blue eyes intent on her face. "Such as Sunday walks, and patient cowboys who know when to sit down." His smile was soft and genuine. "I value those things too." As October gave way to November, the desert nights grew cold. Nora found herself thinking more and more about Wade, about the future they might build together. He had not spoken of love or marriage, but his intentions were clear in every action, every word. She knew he was waiting for her to heal more fully, to be ready for that conversation. One Wednesday afternoon, Sheriff Garrett came into the mercantile with news. "We got word from the territorial marshal," he told Nora, his expression grave. "They caught 3 of the 4 men who attacked you and your sister. They were holed up in a mining camp near Tombstone, bragging about their exploits. They will hang within the month." Nora gripped the counter to steady herself. 3 of 4? One got away during the arrest. But they will find him. Men like that always make mistakes eventually. She nodded numbly. She had thought she would feel satisfaction at this news, some sense of justice being served. Instead, she just felt empty. Hanging those men would not bring Sarah back. It would not erase the nightmares or the guilt or the loss. Wade found her an hour later, sitting on the back step of the mercantile, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her without speaking, just his presence offering comfort. "Finally," she said, "the sheriff came by. They caught most of the men. I heard. He stopped at the ranch to tell me. Thought I would want to know so I could check on you. I do not know what I am supposed to feel." "Whatever you feel is right," Wade said. "There is no supposed to in grief or justice. You feel what you feel." She turned to look at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "Wade, do you ever wonder why terrible things happen, what purpose they serve?" "I used to," he admitted. "After my mother died, I was angry at God, at the world, at fate. I wanted there to be a reason, some grand plan that made her suffering worthwhile. But I never found one. Eventually, I realized that maybe there is no reason. Bad things just happen. What matters is what we do after, whether we let the bad things destroy us or whether we choose to keep living, keep hoping. Sarah told me the day before she died that I should not be afraid to be happy. She said I worried too much about what could go wrong. She sounds wise. She was. Nora took a shaky breath. I think she would like you. I think I would have liked her too. They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nora felt Wade's hand close over hers, warm and solid and safe. She squeezed back, holding on. Thanksgiving came, and Martha invited Nora to join her family for dinner. The boarding house dining room filled with Martha's children and grandchildren, a noisy, warm gathering that made Nora's heart ache with longing for what she had lost. But it also showed her what family could be, how it could expand to include newcomers and strangers, how love could grow in unexpected places. Wade stopped by in the evening, after the dinner dishes were cleared, and asked if she would like to take a walk. They bundled up against the cold and strolled toward the spring, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. I am leaving for a few days, Wade said as they walked. Thomas Irving has business in Tucson, and he wants me to accompany him. We will be gone about a week. Oh. Nora was surprised by how disappointed she felt. A week was not long, but she had grown accustomed to seeing Wade nearly every day. His absence would leave a noticeable gap. I will miss our talks, he said, echoing her thoughts. But I will be back before you have time to forget what I look like. I do not think I could forget, she said quietly. He stopped walking, turning to face her. The moonlight cast his features in silver and shadow. Nora, when I return, there is something important I need to discuss with you. A question I need to ask, but I do not want to ask it right before I leave, because that would not be fair to either of us. Will you wait for me? Her heart was suddenly pounding. She knew what question he meant, could see it in his eyes, in the nervous set of his shoulders. I will wait, she promised. He smiled, and even in the darkness, she could see his relief. Good. That is good. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It was the most intimate touch they had shared, and Nora felt warmth bloom through her chest. The week he was gone felt twice as long as it should. Nora went through her routines at the Mercantile, attended Sunday service, helped Martha with small tasks around the boarding house. But part of her mind was always on Wade, wondering where he was, hoping he was safe, anticipating his return. When he finally rode back into town on a cold December afternoon, she was helping Caroline arrange a new shipment of goods in the store window. She saw him through the glass, dismounting from his horse, and her heart leaped. He looked tired from travel, but whole and healthy. His eyes scanned the street, clearly looking for something, and when his gaze found her through the window, his face lit up with joy. She met him outside, propriety forgotten in her relief at seeing him. You are back, she said, and heard how breathless she sounded. I am back, he confirmed. I missed you, Nora Winters. More than I thought possible to miss someone in just 1 week. I missed you too. Can you take a break? Walk with me? She glanced back at Caroline, who was watching with undisguised interest and a knowing smile. Go, Caroline said, making shooing motions. Business is slow anyway. Nora grabbed her shawl and let Wade lead her away from the main street, toward the rise beyond the church, where he had once told her the sunset was prettiest. When they reached the top, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I have been practicing what I want to say for the entire ride home, he admitted. But now that the moment is here, I cannot remember any of it. Just speak from your heart, Nora said gently. He took a deep breath. Nora, I know we have not known each other long, only a few months really, and I know you have been through terrible things that no one should have to endure. But in these months, I have come to care for you more deeply than I have ever cared for anyone. You are brave and kind and strong, even when you do not feel strong. You make me want to be a better man. You make me excited about the future in a way I have never been before. He paused, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. I spoke with Reverend Michaels before I left for Tucson. I wanted to make sure I could provide for a wife before I asked a certain question. The Reverend told me that Thomas Irving has agreed to sell me half the ranch sooner than planned. I will have land, a home, a future, and I want to share that future with you, if you will have me. He released one of her hands to reach into his vest pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, she saw a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the afternoon light. Nora Winters, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you that there is still joy and love and beauty in this world? I promise I will never give you reason to fear. I promise I will honor your sister's sacrifice by doing everything in my power to make you happy. I promise. Yes, she interrupted, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Wade, I will marry you. His expression transformed from nervous hope to pure elation. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into his arms. Nora went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck, holding tight to this good, patient man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I know I did not say it before, wrapped up in my nerves about proposing, but I love you, Nora. Completely and absolutely. I love you too, she whispered back, and realized it was true. Somewhere between the saloon floor and the spring, between Sunday walks and town dances, she had fallen in love with Wade Irvin, not because he had saved her, but because he had seen her as someone worth knowing, worth courting, worth loving. They stood together on the hill as the sun sank lower, holding each other, planning a future that had seemed impossible just months before. When they finally walked back to town, hand in hand, Martha took one look at Nora's glowing face and the ring on her finger and immediately began planning a wedding. The ceremony took place on a bright January morning in 1883 in the small church where Sarah was buried in the cemetery behind it. Nora wore a cream-colored dress that Caroline helped her sew with lace at the collar and cuffs. Wade wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but undeniably handsome. The whole town turned out to witness their vows. As Reverend Michaels led them through the ceremony, Nora found her eyes drawn to the window that looked out over the cemetery. She could not see Sarah's grave from this angle, but she knew it was there, and she felt her sister's presence like a blessing. Sarah had wanted her to be happy, to find love, to live a full life. Standing here, pledging herself to Wade, Nora felt she was finally honoring that wish. I do, she said when the moment came, her voice clear and certain. I do, Wade echoed, his eyes never leaving her face. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed her gently, reverently, a promise of all the kisses to come. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Martha was openly crying. Caroline threw rice despite standing inside the church, earning a stern look from the Reverend that she cheerfully ignored. The reception was held in the church hall, with food brought by every family in town. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Nora danced with Wade, with Sheriff Garrett, with Doc Morrison, with any man brave enough to ask. She felt lighter than she had in months, as if some burden she had been carrying was finally lifted. As evening approached, Wade led her out to a wagon he had prepared. Her friends and neighbors waved them off with more cheers and rice throwing. Wade drove them to the ranch that was now partially his, to the small house that Thomas Irving had helped him prepare for his new bride. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was clean and well built with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. Someone had left wildflowers in a vase on the kitchen table. Wade had made sure there was firewood stacked and food in the pantry. It was a home, ready for them to begin their life together. What do you think? Wade asked, watching her anxiously as she explored each room. I think it is perfect, Nora said honestly. I think we are going to be very happy here. He swept her into his arms, kissing her with more passion than he had allowed himself before. She responded eagerly, months of careful restraint giving way to desire and love and the promise of forever. He carried her to the bedroom, where everything was new and waiting, and they celebrated their marriage in the way of newlyweds throughout time. Later, lying in Wade's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Nora felt a peace she had not known since before Sarah died. The nightmares would still come, she knew. The grief would still ambush her at unexpected moments. But she was not alone anymore. She had Wade and Agua Caliente and a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his fingers trailing idly through her hair. "That I am grateful," she said, "for all of it, even the terrible parts, because they led me here. To you. To this. I am grateful too." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Rest now, Mrs. Irvin. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us." She smiled at her new name, at the way it sounded in his voice. Then she closed her eyes and let sleep take her, safe and warm and loved. The months that followed were busy ones. Nora continued working at the mercantile, though Caroline gave her more flexibility now that she had a home to manage. Wade worked long days at the ranch, gradually taking over more responsibility as Thomas Irving's health declined. In the evenings, they came together in their little house, sharing meals and conversation and the easy intimacy of married life. Spring brought new challenges. Thomas Irving passed away quietly in his sleep in March, leaving his half of the ranch to his sister in Phoenix. The sister, a widow named Abigail Sutton, arrived in April to inspect her inheritance. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, with decided opinions about everything. Wade was nervous about meeting her, worried she might want to sell the ranch entirely or bring in her own foreman. But Abigail surprised them both. After spending a week inspecting the operation, watching Wade work, and interviewing the ranch hands, she called Wade and Nora to the main ranch house for a meeting. "My brother wrote me about you," Abigail said without preamble, sitting in Thomas's old chair like it was a throne. "He said you were the most honest, hardest working man he had ever known. He said this ranch would fall apart without you." Thomas was generous in his praise, Wade said diplomatically. "Thomas was a good judge of character. I trust his judgment, and I trust what I have seen this week. So here is my proposal. I have no interest in running a cattle ranch. I have my own life in Phoenix. But I do not want to sell to strangers and see my brother's legacy destroyed. So I am offering to sell you my half at a fair price with reasonable terms. You can pay me over 10 years, and in the meantime, you continue to run the operation as you see fit." Wade looked stunned. Nora reached over and squeezed his hand. "That is incredibly generous, Mrs. Sutton," Wade managed. "It is practical," Abigail corrected. "I get a steady income, you get the ranch you have worked for, and Thomas's memory is honored. Everyone wins." She pulled out a contract she had drawn up. "Look it over. Talk to the banker. Make sure the terms are fair. But I am leaving for Phoenix next week, and I would like this settled before I go." They consulted with the banker and with Reverend Michaels, who had a good head for business, despite his religious calling. The terms were indeed fair, perhaps even slightly favorable to Wade. Within a week, the papers were signed. Wade and Nora Irvin were now the owners of the Double I Ranch, named for Irving and Irvin, a tribute to the partnership between Thomas and the man he had trained. Ownership brought new responsibilities and new stresses, but also new possibilities. Wade hired additional ranch hands and began expanding the herd. Nora took over managing the ranch accounts, her experience from the mercantile proving invaluable. They worked side by side, building something that belonged to them, that they could pass on to future generations. In June, Nora began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Wade, afraid to get his hopes up prematurely. When Doc Morrison confirmed her suspicions in early July, she could barely contain her excitement. She told Wade that evening, after supper, as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their land. "I have news," she said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Wade looked at her sharply, reading something in her tone. "What kind of news?" The kind where we will need to add another room to the house in the next few months. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing. Then understanding dawned, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. We are having a baby? Truly? Truly. Doc Morrison says early February, if his calculations are correct. Wade kissed her soundly, then immediately pulled back. Should you be sitting out here? Should you be resting? What do you need? What can I do? She laughed at his sudden panic. I am pregnant, not dying. I am fine. We are fine. You can start by taking a breath. He did, visibly trying to calm himself. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Nora, I am more than happy. I am terrified and excited and grateful and about 100 other things all at once. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. A child. Our child. The pregnancy was mostly easy, for which Nora was grateful. She continued working at the mercantile through September, then shifted to managing the ranch accounts from home as her condition became more obvious. Wade was attentive to the point of being ridiculous, trying to prevent her from doing anything that might be considered strenuous. She finally had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that she would let him know if she needed help. As fall gave way to winter, they prepared the small bedroom that would become the nursery. Martha donated a cradle that her own children had used. Caroline sewed tiny gowns and blankets. The women of Agua Caliente rallied around Nora with advice and support, sharing their own experiences of motherhood. On a cold night in February 1884, Nora's labor began. Wade sent one of the ranch hands racing for Doc Morrison and Martha, then sat with Nora, holding her hand, looking more frightened than she had ever seen him. Women do this all the time, she reminded him between contractions. I will be fine. Sarah probably thought she would be fine too, he said, then looked horrified. I am sorry. I should not have said that. But Nora understood his fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here where medical care was limited. Women died, babies died. It was a reality they both knew too well. I am not Sarah, she said firmly. I am healthy. Doc Morrison is good at his job, and I am too stubborn to die now that we have finally gotten the ranch running smoothly. He laughed shakily, kissing her forehead. You are remarkable, do you know that? Doc Morrison and Martha arrived together, and Wade was shooed out of the bedroom despite his protests. Labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nora focused on breathing, on Martha's calm instructions, on the knowledge that at the end of this ordeal, she would hold her child. Finally, as afternoon sun slanted through the window, she heard the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. It is a boy, Doc Morrison announced, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. A healthy boy with a good set of lungs. Nora looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, and tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. Love crashed over her like a wave, fierce and overwhelming and absolute. Hello, little one, she whispered. Welcome to the world. Wade was allowed in moments later. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might break something. When Nora held up their son for him to see, his eyes filled with tears. He is perfect, Wade said hoarsely. Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him? Wade nodded, accepting the baby with the careful reverence of someone holding precious, fragile treasure. The baby blinked up at his father, and Nora watched Wade fall in love in real time. What should we name him? Wade asked, unable to look away from his son's face. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband and son, Nora knew exactly what this boy's name should be. Thomas, she said. Thomas Irving Irvin, for the man who gave you your start. Tommy for short. Wade's face crumpled. She would have liked that, he managed. Thomas would have been honored. Little Tommy Irvin proved to be a demanding baby, waking every few hours to nurse, crying lustily when his needs were not immediately met. Nora was exhausted, but it was a different kind of exhaustion than she had known after Sarah's death. This was the tiredness of new life, of purpose, of love made manifest. Wade helped whenever he could, changing nappies and walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy. The ranch hands grew accustomed to seeing their boss with a baby in his arms, and more than one grizzled cowboy was reduced to cooing nonsense at the infant. As Tommy grew, he proved to be a happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He laughed easily, reaching for everything with curious hands. Nora would sometimes sit on the porch with him, telling him stories about his Aunt Sarah, whom he would never meet, but whose sacrifice had made his existence possible. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life. Tommy learned to walk, then to run, then to ride a pony that Wade trained especially for him. In 1886, Nora gave birth to a daughter, Lily, who had her father's coloring and a stubborn streak a mile wide. 2 years later came another son, James, quiet where Tommy was boisterous, thoughtful where Lily was impulsive. The ranch prospered under Wade's management. They weathered droughts and storms, rustlers and market fluctuations, always managing to come out ahead through hard work and careful planning. Nora's skill with accounts and Wade's skill with cattle made them a formidable team. Agua Caliente grew along with their family. New businesses opened, more families arrived. The town expanded beyond its original boundaries. Nora and Wade became pillars of the community, the kind of people others turned to in times of trouble or celebration. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Nora with a picnic at the spring where they had sat on that first Sunday walk. The children were left with Martha for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. They sat on the same flat rock, holding hands, looking back on the decade they had built together. "Do you remember the day we met?" Wade asked. "You came into that saloon looking like you had walked through hell itself." "I remember you sat down on the floor so I would not be afraid," Nora said softly. "That was the moment I started to heal, even though I did not know it then. I took one look at you and thought, this woman has survived something terrible, and she is still standing. I wanted to be worthy of that strength. You are worthy of far more than you give yourself credit for." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have built a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Wade agreed. "Sometimes I think about all the coincidences that had to align for us to meet. If those men had not attacked your wagon, if you had walked in a different direction, if you had made it to California, any one of those things, and we might never have found each other. I prefer to think that we would have found each other somehow," Nora said, "that some things are meant to be." He kissed her, long and sweet, and filled with 10 years of love and partnership. "I would find you in every lifetime," he promised. "In every version of the world." They stayed at the spring until the sun began to set, talking about their children and the ranch and their dreams for the future. When they finally returned home, they found their children exhausted from running Martha ragged, and Martha looking frazzled but happy. The years continued to unfold. Tommy grew into a capable young man who shared his father's love of ranching. Lily showed artistic talent, spending hours sketching the desert landscape and the horses she loved. James proved to have a gift for numbers, managing the ranch accounts with his mother by the time he was 12. In 1893, Nora gave birth to one more child, a surprise baby who arrived just as they thought their family was complete. They named her Sarah, for the sister Nora still missed every day. Little Sarah inherited her namesake's determination and her aunt's protective instincts, especially toward her older siblings. As the century drew to a close, Nora and Wade found themselves grandparents. Tommy married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they had 3 children in quick succession. Lily moved to Phoenix to study art, but returned to Agua Caliente every summer with her husband, a gentle man who made his living as a photographer. On a warm evening in the spring of 1900, Nora stood on the porch of the house Wade had prepared for her nearly 20 years earlier. The house had been expanded over the years, rooms added as the family grew, but the core of it remained the same. It was still home, still the place where her healing had truly begun. Wade came out to join her, moving more slowly now than he once had, his dark blonde hair gone gray. But his eyes were still the same winter blue, and they still lit up when he looked at her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "How far we have come," she said. "When I walked into Agua Caliente covered in blood and dust, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be whole again. But you showed me that broken things can be mended, that loss does not have to be the end of the story." "You did the mending yourself," Wade said. "I just sat down so you would not fear long enough to start healing." She smiled, remembering that moment in the saloon, the simple kindness that had changed everything. That was enough, more than enough. They stood together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while their own children supervised. The double of ranch stretched around them, prosperous and thriving, a legacy they would pass to the next generation. Nora thought of Sarah often, especially at moments like these. She wondered what her sister would think of the life Nora had built, the family she had created. She liked to imagine that Sarah was proud, that she looked down from wherever souls went, and felt that her sacrifice had been worthwhile. "I love you," Nora said to Wade, as she had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," he replied, as he always did. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." The sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, lamps were being lit against the gathering darkness. Soon they would go inside, gather around the table with their family, share a meal and stories and laughter. But for now, Nora was content to stand here with Wade, the cowboy who had sat down on a saloon floor so she would not fear, the man who had shown her that love could bloom even in the aftermath of tragedy. She had walked into Agua Caliente, Arizona, broken and alone, expecting nothing but survival. Instead, she had found healing, purpose, family, and a love that had sustained her through nearly 2 decades. She had found home in the most unexpected of places, with the most unexpected of men. And as she stood there in Wade's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, Nora knew that Sarah's final gift to her, the gift of survival and the chance to keep living, had not been wasted. She had honored her sister's memory by embracing happiness, by opening her heart to love, by creating a legacy of her own. The Wild West of her youth was fading, giving way to a new century with new possibilities. But some things remained timeless: love, family, the bonds forged between people who chose to care for each other. These were the things that mattered, the things that endured. Wade pressed a kiss to her temple, and Nora smiled, her heart full to bursting. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together as they had faced everything else. Partners, lovers, best friends, parents, grandparents, all of these things and more. Their story had begun with fear and ended with love. It was enough. It was everything. It was exactly what they both had always wanted, even before they knew such happiness was possible. Inside, someone called them for dinner. Wade took Nora's hand, and together they walked toward the light and warmth waiting for them, toward family and laughter and the beautiful, ordinary magic of an evening at home. The door closed behind them, sealing them in with the people they loved most, shutting out the darkness that had once threatened to consume them both. They had survived. They had thrived. They had loved and been loved in return. In the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?